Hello and welcome to Wellness Influencers, where we bring you the art and science of wellness to discover happier, healthier, and wealthier you. Here is your host, Dr. Kaveh Elahiun.
Good day, our viewers, our listeners. This is Dr. Kaveh Elahiun coming to you guys with another fantastic interview. Today we have Dr. Ben Lerner joining us from Florida. Thank you, Dr. Ben Lerner, for allowing us this time to have a conversation with you. Please give us a short introduction and we will dive right into it.
Short introduction. So I'm from Orlando, have had many years of experience in chiropractic and out of chiropractic. So I've also got my master's degree in industrial and organizational psychology. So I work with a lot of big companies along with small ones, helping them create corporate health. And then I also have traveled quite a bit speaking around the world, including Canada quite a bit, because I had two books that were not only New York Times bestsellers, but they were bestsellers in Canada as well as Australia and China. So have been around the world a few times.
Fantastic. Now, we will get into the books and the topics later as we're going to be discussing it. So when it comes to wellness and mindset goes a long way. How is it that you can create that winning mindset?
You know, I grew up in a home that made it easy for me to get into wellness because my parents were not healthy. So I watched them since I was a little kid struggle with their weights. They both smoked cigarettes and just didn't look good. And so I was very inspired early on to not do that. And then sadly, my dad died at 52. From a heart attack, and my mom had a stroke at 49 from that lifestyle. So it really inspired me for two reasons. One is, of course, I didn't want to end up like that, but also I saw, and this is really where I hope people can be inspired today or motivated, is what that does to a family. So to lose your dad that young, you know, I had brothers still in high school, I was very young, what that did to my mom to lose my dad and pushed her to this level of stress where she had a stroke. You realize that it's not just about you being healthy and your own wellness, but how that impacts all the generations behind you and everybody around you that loves you and needs you.
Amazing. When it comes to, when we talk wellness, it's emotional, spiritual, physical, and our finances, basically. They go hand in hand. Which one do you like to tackle first?
Well, certainly, you know, when it comes to our physical health, you know, we're both doctors. That's what I'm very into. But you're absolutely right. If there's a lot of stress, economic stress, if your relationships are shot, if there are social issues, then that's going to certainly create an environment that'll make it very difficult to be healthy, even if you've got a well-adjusted atlas and a good diet.
Now, how is it that you can, because generally people say that, you know, I don't like my job. I hate my job. I'm not motivated. What is it that you do and what is it that you recommend to people who you coach to start that spark and keep that fire going again?
You know, for whether it's a chiropractor or an entrepreneur or I'm working within a corporation, this is also, you know, often the issue that I'm stuck and it feels like it's over and there's no way out and I don't like work and I don't feel like there's anywhere I can go. And so what we look at is what is an additional skill set you can develop to make yourself more valuable and give yourself other opportunities. So I had my training as a chiropractor, I have my bachelor's in nutrition, and even just the nutrition gave me certain opportunities that the chiropractic didn't. I was able to write that book and have the credentials and turned into 20 books and curriculum because of that nutrition credential. When I wanted to go even further, I developed another skill. You know, I went back to school and got my master's in industrial and organizational psychology. When I wanted to work with executives, I went back and got an executive coaching certification. So I think what you have to look at if you feel stuck is, are there other skills that can make me more valuable at my current position, but even open up other opportunities if I'm looking for them?
Now, psychologically speaking, when somebody's stuck in a position, they just don't see the light at the end of the tunnel, so do we speak. how can we bring that light closer so they will be motivated? What's the motivational input you will add to that person or give them in order to keep them going?
Yeah, there's a condition called learned helplessness, where you just feel that over time you are unable to get anywhere. You can't change your circumstances. They actually did the early studies on animals and found that at some point they just gave up. So if every time they went for the food, you gave them a shock, they eventually, even if you remove the shock, wouldn't go for their food. And so we want to never lose sight of the fact that we're never in a situation where there's nothing we can do. So what I encourage people to do is just figure out the very next thing. What is something you can do to begin solving the problem? What is the most foundational point? So when I'm coaching, people throw a lot at me. And very often, some of it is I'm stuck, or that sense that they really feel there's no way out. So we get down to what is the one thing, what's the first thing we can do to start improving your situation? And generally people can come up with something foundational that they know, if I could just figure this out, I could start to make progress and improve my position.
Amazing. And with your nutritional background, obviously nutrition has a lot to do with how we feel physically and emotionally. So some of the things that would encourage better health physically, what would you recommend? What is it that we should do? What kind of a lifestyle? These days there's diet this and diet that, and don't eat this and eat too much of this. Give us a guideline, please.
Now, I run an organization and am involved in testing. So our organization does a number of tests we do on people to determine their best diet. But more than that, for example, like in my genetics, I mentioned my mom and dad. So obviously those are not good genetics. I'm 53, so I'm 1 year older than my dad was when he died. But he was 50 pounds heavier than me when he died. And at 53, I'm in the best shape of my life. But I got there through educating myself about my own blood, my own DNA, what's going on in my system. So I found out, for example, if I ate a diet high in animal products, I would be headed down the same road as my mom and dad, because I have a particular gene that doesn't do well with saturated fats. I, of course, looked at their genetics and realized that while some people, you can't kill them. Some people can smoke and drink and be overweight and they live to 90. In my family, you die apparently in your 50s. So I didn't do any of those things. So by testing and really analyzing, your genetic heritage, that hopefully will be that motivator to live a different lifestyle. Because the good news is we're not stuck with our genes. We now know that it's all about the environment we expose our genes to. And if that's a healthy environment and an informed one, because we've done the necessary testing, we can make good decisions and express really great genes and a whole different future than maybe our forefathers did.
Fantastic. Now, with the genetic testing that you do, which I'm absolutely interested in, what do you use? What platform do you guys use to do the genetic testing? And how is it that you plug in that information to find out what you can and you can't eat?
So there's a very cutting edge group out of Poland that worked on the Helix project and just got an award from MIT for their work last month. And the latest science in genetics is what they call a polygenic risk score. So we're actually analyzing over 1,500 genes to figure out exactly what you're most predisposed to. And then there's also, in addition to that, there are a host of other genes, several dozen that are called actionable genes. So these are the ones that have been proven. There's enough science there to show that once you know you have that gene, you can actually make a lifestyle change to not end up succumbing to any dangers of that variant and in fact express completely different health. So you want a polygenic risk score and you want to know those actionable genes, and combined, it's literally like what I call the X-ray of your lifestyle. You can find out exactly what you need to do to blueprint your diet, your fitness, your supplement plan. And of course, all of it requires chiropractic, because that environment that is really influencing gene expression is run by the spine and nervous system. So that's always a key element to all of this.
Wow. So truly, it's all about eating your body type because the DNA determines your body type.
No, it really is. Yeah, we all have different genetic makeup, which will determine our diet. And one of the things about genes that we found out is that there's no middleman. As soon as you eat certain foods, it's immediately expressed in your genes. So if you're doing it poorly, the negative impact is like that. But better, as soon as you start to do it properly, you immediately start expressing better health. I mean, literally right away.
Some of the common denominators in any sort of inflammatory diseases has been known to be caused by sugar, which has had many, many, many names, especially one of the books I was reading called The Sugar Crush. They call it the White Death. What are the effects of sugar or on consuming basically processed sugar in our body?
Certain things are bad for everybody. So sugar is one of those things that nobody can do. But, and then again, if we're talking genetically, certain genes predispose you to even more radically negative effects from the sugar. So, for example, if you've got any sort of IL-6 or TNF gene, any of these inflammatory genes, you really need to stay away from it because sugar aggressively causes inflammation. It also, you have something called advanced glycation end products or AGEs, causes you to go galloping through the valley of the shadow of death. You start to age very rapidly. It stiffens up the arteries, causes the eyes to deteriorate, leads to cataracts, just aging of the skin, aging of the muscles and tissues. Literally every time you put sugar in your body, and that excess sugar, that's of course a real big problem. Can be caused by sugar, and actually genetically, we were not supposed to eat sugar in the quantities that we're eating it. So our forefathers, our ancestors, they were eating, maybe 4 grams a year, or 4 pounds a year, and we're eating about 144 pounds a year on average. We're doing about 40 times more sugar than our genes were created to absorb. So it's become a real problem.
And one of the things I read about it, just to follow up with what you had said, is the degeneration is not because of degeneration and aging. It becomes a lack of regeneration because of the wrong diet that we have, which causes its own difficulties. Now, if somebody wants to do this DNA testing, how do they go about it? Do they have to contact you? Is there a DNA kit that they have to buy?
Yeah, so we have about 200 doctors that provide the tests and who know how to analyze the test and give you the report and walk you down the road of the right protocol for your genetics. And so it's something that that you go through a doctor for, and you simply get a kit, you do a cheek swab, put it back in the kit, send it in, and within a few days you've got your report.
Fantastic. Now, I want to dive into a couple of topics that it is a personal interest to me. One of them was there is a topic which you brought about speaking prior to the interview, lessons for the $100 million chiropractors of the past. Please elaborate. I'm very interested.
Well, as an example, so there are chiropractors that were a couple generations before us that died with hundreds of millions of dollars in their bank accounts. And so these types of doctors, were in the, they're coming from the 50s and 60s and 70s. And so then all of a sudden now, several generations later, you just don't see that. Certainly, if it's there, it's in the ones and twos. It's certainly not something that's happening consistently. And so one of those particular doctors is a doctor named Dr. Tom Owen, who was a mentor of mine before he passed away last year, in his 80s. And he knew, BJ Palmer, Clarence Gonstead. He worked for those guys. He's from that generation. So with the people around him, again, these guys that had hundreds of millions of dollars, that was the first question I asked him. Why don't we have that anymore today? What are the differences? And he really gave me 3 things that I want to share with you right now. The first was, back then, chiropractic was a lot about, and this is for everybody watching, about really listening to your intuition, really trying to figure out what is the destiny that God has for each one of us. What is the real potential, the life you were born to live? In chiropractic, we call that listening to innate. There's this wisdom in the body that is from God, that if we listen to it, it will tell us our future. So back then, they were really about, you've got to go inside and discover the plans that the world has for you. The second part is, as you discover it, is they said all of these big guys with all this money and all the success, they all knew in 50 years where they'd be. When they met early on, back again, decades and decades ago, all of them sat there and had a target. And he said, and every one of us ended up right where we expected. And I thought that was pretty incredible because, if you don't have a target, or if it's a small target, as he was sharing, that's where you'll end up. If there's, as they say, if you have no destination, any path will take you there. So knowing where you're going and making sure it's big, and knowing decades out where you're going to be. The final piece was this, and it gets back into something we talked about a moment ago, which is the training. So one thing that fascinated me about that group that Dr. Owen was raised up with, all of them were experts in a lot of things. So Dr. Owen, he had his own airplanes that he flew. He's a pilot. He had a cruise ship, pretty much. It was about that size, his boat, and he could pilot that ship himself. This guy was an expert in a number of things, in mechanics, in building, in construction, an expert. Today's chiropractor tends to have, they know chiropractic, and pretty much that's about it. And so these guys were able to leverage all that expertise for a number of different businesses, whether they owned, real estate and construction companies, or whether they owned automobile dealerships, or whether they made a fortune in real estate, or owned a lot of different types of businesses, or had businesses within the business, like Clarence Gonstead, who ran an entire lab. He did lab testing in his clinic, and he ran seminars, out of his company, and obviously had his technique. And so this guy was making millions everywhere. Where that's just not the average chiropractor or person or entrepreneur, for that matter, of the day.
Wow. Now, you said the purpose of continual education as a doctor is overcoming the limits for the doctor. Now, continual education is great, but you're right. We tend to be not going after, they're not trying to learn as much as we can. We learn one thing, we stick for it, and we basically try to make that work. Give us a little, rundown of what you mean by trying to continually learn.
Yeah, I'm really hot in this. As I've mentioned, I've got 3 degrees, and I'm working on other certifications, and have many certifications, and going back to get another degree here shortly. And so I'm really big on the fact that I feel limited by just having my chiropractic education. I'm glad I have it. It's been powerful. We want to keep growing and evolving in life. You got to keep learning. So my daughter, she wants to be a chiropractor. And I told, what's that?
Great.
So I said, okay, you can be a chiropractor, because she's into health like I am. So she eats like I do. She's a great athlete, in really good shape. But I said, listen, before you can become a chiropractor, school and get your business degree. So she's going to get a business degree first. So she's not limited by, again, being a doctor, not knowing accounting, not knowing finance, not knowing how to build and manage a team, not understanding technology. I'm not going to let her limit herself by only having the skill set of being a chiropractor. So that's, even for my own children, that's a rule that I've set in place. Now, when it comes to being a leader in healthcare, if your focus is just on healthcare, then be the greatest healthcare practitioner you possibly can be. So as I mentioned, I was a very straight chiropractor originally, but I realized as people got sicker and sicker and had more complex and chronic needs, I needed to really understand how to read lab tests. I needed to be able to respond nutritionally where necessary. I had to look at deeper issues of toxicity, and that's all required, going back and getting other study and training and certification. And as you mentioned, this is psychology, because if I couldn't change the way people thought and couldn't deal with all these negative emotions, then we could have healthy spines for just really miserable people, or healthy spines but they'd quit because I hadn't been able to get them to change their commitments and their lifestyle.
So I guess the challenge becomes to have one's mind and body working in perfect marriage. So when you have the mindset for it, your body basically follows. How do you make that mindset? We have a lot of, this is January. This is the month that everybody makes the New Year's resolutions. And all of them, as you and I both know, would fail by January 18th, or people don't follow it after that. How can one have that mindset to keep the changes going, although difficult?
Yeah. So there's some bad news first, and that they know that people that don't follow a healthy lifestyle and can't stick to their New Year's resolutions or any commitments any time of the year, there's actually limitations in their prefrontal cortex. There's actually underdeveloped areas that make them more prone to bad choices. So that's the science. But the good news is that if we begin to make good choices and we begin to stay the course in our commitments and change our lifestyle, we actually develop those parts of the brain. They used to think these key areas of the brain that are so necessary for cognitive thinking and the right choices, they used to think we were stuck with that at birth, but those areas can be developed by the good choices. Meaning, as I make good choices, I actually become more and more prone to keep making good choices. However, as I make bad choices, I become more and more fixed in a lifetime of lifestyle making bad choices. So that's part of the good news. Now, the other bad news, here's some more bad news, good news. The bad news is that it does take time. We've wired our brain to lead a certain lifestyle. So we've wired our brain to sleep in, to not exercise, to eat the junk food. So to rewire, that's going to take some consistency. So they've done studies on what does it really take to create a new habit. And you may have heard them say it's only 21 days. But if you actually read that study like I did when I was getting my master's, it showed that in 21 days, you can improve your habits of drinking water. So is an easy change like that can occur in your habits within 21 days. But when you look at things like exercising consistently, eating better, waking up early, being committed to your work and developing new skills and all those kinds of more difficult challenges, then actually that could take a year or years to develop. But again, that's bad news. Good news is, though, if you do stay the course, those good habits will eventually really set in. They'll get baked in our brain's wiring and be difficult or even impossible to change. So it's just as hard to change a good habit. Like, you can never get me to not exercise and eat junk food, because the good habits are so baked in. When I don't exercise or I do eat sugar, I just feel lousy and can't wait to get back to doing it right again.
It's the part of a healthy lifestyle is not a diet. And I always try to tell my practice members that it's a lifestyle. You can't just go on a diet and imagine that it's all going to be well. And the problem is that people don't follow the lifestyle. We are people of instant gratification. We want to see right away the changes. And lifestyle and how you do exercise, eating right, it pays off in later years. and it takes gradual changes to make it basically stick. Now, with diet, what diet do you follow? Are you carno? Are you, keto? What is it that you do?
So again, for one, I do know my body's needs because I've done the testing. So what I do is a modified Mediterranean. So the Mediterranean diet does year upon year upon year always prove out to be the most effective diet, but there's different ways to even lead the Mediterranean. So first of all, one thing we know about it, it's plant-based. So we do know that the more plants you eat, all those great phytonutrients, all those great brain supporting nutrients and all those great mitochondria supporting nutrients, we know that plants have many great things in them. So we want to be plant-based regardless, no matter what type of diet you're doing. Then we also know that sugar is bad, and sugar doesn't just come from the white powder, it comes from too many carbohydrates, particularly refined carbohydrates. So regardless of the diet you're following, we know you shouldn't be doing a lot of bread and pasta and rice and potatoes or just sugar itself, certainly not things like genetically modified organisms like wheat and corn. These are carbs that, regardless of your diet, are bad for you, and too many of them just gets you right back into all the sugar problems we mentioned earlier. So in a modified Mediterranean, it's highly plant-based, but there's very little carbohydrates. So there's not a lot of grains, not a lot of starches in that diet. And then also it's minimal saturated fat. So the focus of the fats are omega-3s, monounsaturated fats. So I take fish oil, eat sardines and other fish. We do, the avocado, the macadamia, these types of fats. Just more a little bit of the white meat chicken or the white meat turkey, which is going to be more monounsaturated than saturated fat. So it's that type of diet that both is modified with lower carb, it's Mediterranean, so high plant-based and high good fats. And for me, really low on saturated fats, unlike keto, which is higher saturated fats. Because for my body, I've got the ApoE4 gene and the FTO gene. And so I don't want to be cranking up those saturated fats, or I'd probably be on the way to early onset dementia, heart disease, stroke, just like my parents.
So Dr. Lerner, I guess the key is to know what your body type is, what your DNA asks from you to use as a fuel for your body, and then follow it closely. And if you fall off the wagon here and there, at least you have done through the life, so you can get back on. Now, speaking about the diet, how much gut health has to do with all this?
Yeah, so I mentioned going through a lot of certifications. So when you do certifications in molecular healthcare, we know that the gut, sort of like the spine, is the foundation of everything. So your spine and nervous system is foundational to all your functions, genetic health, everything in your body. So foundationally, we need a healthy spine and nervous system. From there, we need a healthy gut. So if you've got a gut issue, we know that's foundational to inflammation, to what inflammation leads to, heart disease and cancer. And actually, it's the very first thing you look at. So if you're really listening to your top experts in autoimmune, for example, they're going to say gut, gut, gut. You got to look at the gut as the first line of defense to autoimmune, obviously both preventing it or dealing with it if somebody's got it already. And we do a lot of gut testing. So I've looked at a lot of stool reports, and I've looked at a lot of dysbiosis reports from organic urine testing. I've looked at a lot of blood tests for candida and other fungus. And these are the things we look at. And when people have those types of issues on those lab tests and we address them with care, we see radical changes in people's overall well-being, once that's addressed. And the last thing I'll say on gut is that with antibiotics in our foods and our exposure to glyphosates, which are just in all of the things that we're eating today and that we're exposed to, your chance of having a gut issue is really 100%. There's no way to escape it. It may be worse in some than others, but all of us should be regularly addressing gut health not waiting until there are signs of SIBO or leaky gut or anything like that, or a full-blown autoimmune before we do something about it.
Dr. Lerner, you bring out so many good points, and discussions on these things can go for hours, but we know you have had some bestseller books. Let's go over the name of the books, and so we can actually, I will be adding the links for these books at the bottom of this interview, so if our viewers need to go and find the books, they can do so.
Well, if you go to drbenlerner.com, it has more of my latest books. So my famous book that took me around the world was called Body by God. And it really just took a natural look at the body and what foods are made for it versus what foods are made by man, not for it. And really followed a lot of what you've been talking about today. We went through several different elements of health, mental health, just managing stress. What we call it peace management. So we're building peace versus managing stress. We get into diet, deep into exercise. I mean, exercise is like the wonder drug of the century when you look at all the positive things that exercise can do. And also another area, to your point, is a whole time management, because it is a lifestyle. It's how we live our life, not just simply a diet, but how we plan every area, planning for our relationships, planning for when we'll exercise, planning for the time we'll spend at work. I mean, just putting a plan together for your life so it's even possible to lead a positive, satisfying, healthy lifestyle, and not just some diet you'll quit, as you mentioned, by January 18th.
Now, Dr. Lerner, stress is a part of our life, and you can't really avoid it. People think, I always tell my practice members and the people I coach that, I have stress too, but I have learned how to manage it so it doesn't affect me negatively. Can you dive into that? Let us know what you do. What do you recommend for people to do with stress and all the negative feelings that keep us back from being our best self?
Stress is not necessarily bad. We need it to survive. It's whether or not it's distress or eustress. So distress is the negative stress. And this is when we perceive a problem as having no solution. We got into that earlier, taking people down to what's the one thing we can do, what's the first problem to solve to start making progress, so that we realize we're never without options. We're never without choices and an ability to overcome our circumstances. As they say, the problems around you are nothing compared to the power that's in you. There's always a way out. Because eustress, which is where, for example, I'm involved in a lot of things, and sometimes it can get stressful, but that doesn't mean it's hurting me. So the fact that today, there's dozens of calls to make and this interview to be on, and, being a good dad and being a good husband, making sure I stay healthy and in shape so I don't leave them behind like my mom and dad did to us, and, writing that next book and running that next company and getting that next degree. It sounds stressful, and it is, but it's called eustress because it's all empowering, positive stress that's adding value to my life. And so it actually is helpful. So adding things that are empowering and constructive, that type of stress is good stress. Use the negative energy for positive by doing something that can propel your career and your life and your body forward. And that suddenly will change your perspective on stress being a negative thing. Instead, you'll see it as a positive thing.
Amazing. Dr. Lerner, I mean, there's so many topics we can talk about, but I know time is limited, and I thank you for joining us. In closing, give us some pearls of wisdom, sir.
Well, I gave several already, but what I would encourage people at this time of year, it's the first of the year, and, in my corporate work, we have a plan. No big company would go into the year without having a really solid plan. And so you'd hate to think that everybody watching would just wake up and suddenly it's 2021, and really it wasn't a whole lot different. 2020 wasn't much different than 2019. But if we really set targets, something we're committed to, one thing for the first quarter that's foundational to the next quarter, and then one thing for the next quarter that's foundational to the third, and finally hitting that target that you've so clearly laid out for the end of the year. If we really put together a great plan for the year, then we will see success. You know, even in our marriage, you know, we originally got married and it was not turning out like we'd hoped, and we realized, well, we hadn't really planned for anything. So once we planned our time, and we suddenly planned where we would pray together and work out together and have our date nights and have our time with our children. Once it was all planned out, suddenly we have this great, thriving 17-year beautiful marriage. And the same will go for your life. If you plan to have a great life, you've got your greatest chance of experiencing one.
Fantastic. Dr. Lerner, the website that you mentioned that people can read about you more, please mention that, and anywhere else that people can reach you. Give us Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all that, please.
Yeah, drbenlerner.com is the best place to start, and you can find pretty much everything from there.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, sir. I hope and wish that we will have you on board again, hopefully sometime soon.
Keep up the great work. Thank you.
Thank you.